What's up, everybody? The old microphone joke's just never going to go away, is it? And it's all my fault. I'll totally accept it. But hopefully you can hear me. I am plugged in. We're all good to go. I've switched it on. It should be working. So hello to all of you that have been hanging around all afternoon during the chat. Brilliant stuff. Love it. Hello to you all. Jason Arellano from the Philippines, all the way out there. Dave West in Portsmouth. Hello to you, mate. Thanks for joining. Adam Nagy from Hungary. Hello. All over the world. I love it. Hello from Utah. Russ Burton. Finland. Kimmo Tonkari. Harry Coven from right here in the UK. Thank you very much to all of you for taking the time out of your Monday night to come and say hi and join. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Right, there was no Grand Prix this weekend, which means we don't have a specific topic to cover off the back of a race like we normally would on a Monday. But given that there was a gap in the schedule, I still thought we should do this anyway, because who wants to go a whole 2 weeks without Formula One, or at least a week anyway. So if we can cover off some topics tonight that might not normally get squeezed in because there's so much stuff to talk about off the back of a race, then so be it. So as always, I put the call out to you earlier asking for any questions you might have around anything Formula One related, and as ever, you didn't disappoint. So I've got a whole list of what I thought were great ones, and I know there's been loads more in the chat all afternoon. I've nabbed some out of there as well, but just keep them coming, because as we go through the next hour, we'll dip in and out of them as best we can. So fire them away and we'll try and cover off as much as we can. So let's get started. I'm going to start actually with, as I said, because there's no specific topic to cover here, I'm going to start with a question about Ferrari. I know that's where we often go with these chats, a Ferrari bashing half hour. It's not really going to be that. I don't like to bash Ferrari, but let's start with this one, which comes from Matt, who says, what realistic chance do Ferrari have in improving their car and engine for next year, especially with all the restrictions that are in place to reduce the costs? Keep up the awesome work. Thanks very much, Matt. Let's talk about that, because Ferrari aren't going to be able to do very much this year at all. In terms of improving perhaps what is their biggest deficit, which is the power unit. And that's mostly because the restrictions, as we all know now, the hardware is all frozen, pretty much, bar a few reliability improvements. So if you've got a reliability issue, you can go to the FIA and you can say, look, we've got this item that keeps breaking. It means we may not finish Grand Prix. The FIA and Formula One, they want as many cars finishing races as possible. So on those grounds, you can go along and say, listen, this is the fix to it, but it does mean taking the engine apart, replacing this bit. We'll do it to all of our engines, and it's for reliability. It's not a performance-enhancing component. So that's all you can do right now. When it gets to the end of the year, as we all now know, there's this now token system in place. We've got a certain number of tokens on the chassis side that you can make improvements to your performance, the characteristics of your car. People like McLaren are having to use all those up to install the Mercedes engine, of course, into that chassis that was never designed for it. So everyone's going to use those tokens in different ways. But when it comes to the power unit for next year, there is a schedule that's been set out to cover right through till 2025, which is when the next generation of power units are going to be brought into Formula One. So up until that point, there's a schedule of when things can be done. Now, 2021 is actually a really important milestone in that schedule, because that's the next big opportunity to make performance-enhancing improvements to your power unit. So ahead of next season, and it has to be ahead of next season, because once, I think there's a date, I forget the actual date, but it may well be just the start of the season. Whatever you turn up to 2021 with, you are then locked in, bar some very small token improvements that you can do along the way. So they have an opportunity, Ferrari, to address the problems with their power unit, you know, given that it's performance they need. At the end of this season and ahead of next season, that's their opportunity to do that. The reason 2021 is so important is that the restrictions become increasingly more severe from 2021 right through to, as I said, the end of 2024, the beginning of 25. So what you turn up with in 2021 is a really important step, or has to be an important step, because then you get some restricted improvements through to, I think, 2023, at which point the hardware's locked. So in 2023, your engine is frozen, and that will then see you through 2023 and 2024 ahead of the new ones coming in 25. So it's a really important step that Ferrari need to take. They've been working on it all of this season knowing what a massive disaster the current power unit is, and we will see whatever they can turn up with ahead of next season. So, you know, aside from the power unit, Matt, there are clearly some deficits in the Ferrari car as well, but I think the two are probably quite intrinsically linked. Ferrari have developed a car that was originally based on a very high performance engine, probably the most high performance engine. And that means that if you've got huge amounts of power, you can sacrifice a bit of drag. So you can have a really massively high downforce producing car, even though that causes you a higher drag number, because you've got so much power, you can push through that drag and take the benefits of the downforce. Well, if you lose the power, you're left, as Ferrari are now, with a car that's still massively draggy, very slow in a straight line. They don't have the power to go with it, and they're suffering as a result of that. So that's essentially the situation that Ferrari are in right now, is that they are working very hard on a power unit. They will bring an all new power unit from what we hear ahead of next season, and that will be running probably on dynos as we speak. So we'll already have some idea of the level of step that they should be able to take ahead of next season. Will it be enough? They're still going to be massively on the back foot because of not being able to constantly develop like all the other teams are throughout the course of 2020. But they have an opportunity to close the gap. It's still going to be a very tough call to see if they can close it enough to mix it with the likes of Mercedes. That's my thoughts on that one. Johnny O, who thinks Marc should attempt the undercut for his next haircut / pit stop? Nice one, Johnny. Yeah, the old Barnett's getting... that's still my lockdown hair. Right, what do we see here? Vasmore7. Marc, do you think they're now playing the long game to get more aero time by ending constructors further down the pecking order? So that refers to those who don't know. From next year, of course, we have this sliding scale of aerodynamic research that the teams will all get. So the leading team, the team that wins the championship, will get a massively reduced amount of wind tunnel time and CFD time. On a sliding scale down to the team that came last, they will get much more of that in an attempt to try and close up the field. It seems like a fairly sensible way to do it. You know, you've got to police it, but we do that already to some extent. So it's sensible. Are Ferrari doing that on purpose? I don't think they're doing it on purpose, because I do think they'd love to see some improvements in their car, because any improvements you can make, anything you can find, can still be beneficial. That knowledge can still be beneficial moving forward. They are going to get a lot more wind tunnel research and aero research time than the likes of Mercedes, and that will benefit them next year, of course. But they still have to overcome the biggest problem, which is, of course, as I said, the power unit. So I'm not sure they're doing it deliberately. Let me see, what else have we got here? Hold on. Right, Haas drivers. We might talk about Haas drivers in a minute. Let me see. Harry Cowan. Bye-bye, it's bedtime. Sorry, mate. Sleep well. I hope we don't give you nightmares. Right, let's move it on then, because we've moved away from... Oh, here we go. Ian Campbell. Did Ferrari cheat last year on fuel, which is why they're so slow now? Well, Ferrari were definitely doing something that was bending the rules. Let's say that. Listen, just on that Ferrari cheating scandal, I think we can all safely assume that Ferrari were doing something that wasn't strictly within the regulations last year, and off the back of the investigation, we now know, of course, with the changes that have been implemented, they've had to redesign the way their power units operated, and it's cost them massively. So off the back of that, we can say they were probably doing something a bit dodgy. However, to give Ferrari a little bit of leeway on this, and I'm loath to do this because it does sound like they were doing something well dodgy, but if it's around fuel flow, which we think it is, so we think they've found ways to circumnavigate the fuel flow restrictions that are in place, the really strict and tight restrictions that everybody has to adhere to. If they found a way around that, that's how they managed to deliver so much power. There is a way to compare that to other scenarios in Formula One which haven't been dealt with or frowned upon so heavily. For example, and this may not be quite as serious, but the way that Ferrari did this was there was a test in place, a measurement, a sensor that measured fuel flow. Ferrari managed to get around the testing procedure, essentially. So when they were tested, when they were measured, they were absolutely fine, but they found a way to circumnavigate that. So if you think about the flexible wings that, well, every team is working very hard on, but Red Bull really pioneered a few years ago, Similar kind of scenario where they had a test to measure how much your wing flexes. Of course, they can only do that in the pit lane in a static situation. Red Bull managed to develop very clever, intricate layups of carbon, different weaves within that carbon to mean that under static load, it just about passed the flexi tests with the weights on the end of the wings. But when they went out on the circuit and got the excessive load that was of a maximum speed aerodynamic downforce load on it, it flexed even more than that. And so in some ways, that's very similar, isn't it? They breached the rules. Their wing flexed more than was allowed. They knew that. Probably everyone else knew that. But when it came to the testing procedure that the FIA had in place, well, they were within that. Now, are Red Bull as guilty as Ferrari in that? Is it as devious? Is it cheating? It's bending the rules, isn't it? So in some ways, you've got to say that Ferrari were very clever and found a way around the testing that the FIA had put in place, just like Red Bull did with the flexi wings. Now, I know the outcomes are different. I know the performance enhancing capabilities of those are probably quite different, but there are some similarities. So whilst everyone's going in very hard on Ferrari, you have to accept that lots of other teams have done similar kind of things in different scenarios. There we go. Right, let's... if you pass the test, it's not cheating, says Ben Guest. Kind of. Well, there you go. Ferrari passed their tests until they were fully investigated, at which point, presumably, they didn't pass those tests. Right, there we go. Let's move it on, because I think we've done enough to Ferrari for tonight. There's a couple of good questions here from the same chap, and this comes from a guy called Tejas Pethka. I hope I've pronounced that right. But he says here, oh, hang on, do you know what? Let me swap that over because he's asked two and I've been very generous and I've let him have two. He says here, I have two pretty technical questions. The first one is that when Pirelli specify minimum tyre pressures, at what temperatures are these measurements taken? Since tyre pressures will obviously change when the tyre heats up. That's a great question. I saw some of you guys talking about this earlier on in the chat just before we came on air. The way this happens is that, in fact, let me tell you how it used to happen, because it used to happen on the grid. So the teams would go to the grid ahead of the race. The tyres that went on the car would be fitted to the race start tyres would be fitted to the car. The FIA delegates would wander up and down with their gauges and they would check every single car. And then at that point, the tyre pressures would be locked in and you weren't allowed to make adjustments. But what was happening was that the teams were all putting these massively heated rim heaters or brake heaters, rim heaters in the car that were hugely inflating the temperatures at a point where the FIA would come along, they'd measure that pressure. Of course, with the inflated temperatures, the pressure would be above the minimum, but it was an unrealistic temperature. So then they'd take the heaters out, they'd go on their parade lap, the tyre temperature would cool down to what was actually a much more normal running temperature, and along with that, the tyre pressures would drop to a much lower pressure, which is what the teams want, because that's what's best for performance. And the FIA realised that that's how teams were getting around that. That's when we started to have failures, and Pirelli started to say, right, well, if we're having these failures, we're going to have to massively raise the minimum pressures that we set. So now what happens is they have a different measuring procedure, and the pressures are always taken by the FIA whilst the tyres are still in their blanket, so before they even go onto the car. Now we know what the blanket pressure is, temperature is rather, because they're set. It's 80 degrees on the rear and 100 degrees on the front. That's a regulation, so every team has to operate at those temps. And so therefore we know that when the tyre pressures are checked, they're being done at a constant temperature for every team. Therefore, it's not easy to play around with the same kind of tricks that they were doing before prior to that. And then they go on the car and we know where they all started. So that's how they do it. So they measure at a set temperature. It's the temperature within the blanket that is regulated by the regulations, and that's how they keep everybody the same. So that's that one. Let me see any questions on that. There's a thing as known as breaking the spirit of the rule and following it to the letter, says Matt Black. So we're still talking about what's cheating and what's just bending the rules. Are you following the rule to the letter of the law or within the spirit of the law? And there is some grey area, but that is Formula One. That's exactly what designers at every team are specifically looking for when the regulations come out. They're looking for grey areas that they might be able to exploit. And that's one of the reasons that this time around, with this set of regulations for 22, they got the teams more involved than they've ever been in writing the rules. They gave the rules to the teams and said, listen, you go away, find the loopholes, and then let's close them, because that doesn't advantage anybody. If we close those loopholes, nobody can benefit from them. Nobody can spend the huge amount of money that probably will cost in doing so. So you're using the people who would normally be exploiting those loopholes to try and close them before we ever get to a point of locking down a set of regs. So it's a sensible move, and we'll have to see if there are still any that are left open for teams to exploit when we go through 2022. I'm sure there must be something. Right, so that was the first question from Tejas Pethka, but he asked another one, which was this one. He says, number 2, someone complained over the radio while going through Arrabbiata 1 and 2 that they weren't able to turn the steering. Brundle said the power steering was locked out. What exactly was the problem here? Now, this was Mugello, of course. I think it was Carlos Sainz, if I remember rightly. And what he was talking about was the power steering is hydraulically assisted, and that hydraulic assistance is obviously controlled by the onboard hydraulic system, which is completely configurable. So the teams have the capability to control how much power assistance is put through that system at any given time. And they set that up according to the racetrack, according to the circuit, and according to driver feel and everything else. But because of the extreme angles, geometry angles on the front end of the car today, if you suddenly took away the power steering but left the geometry as it was, it would be impossible for a driver to get a car around a racetrack, or almost impossible, because the force required is so great because of these extreme angles that are on the outboard ends that that you wouldn't be able to do it. Now, what happened, I'm pretty sure what happened, because I've seen it happen before at McLaren on their car, is that they must have just fallen outside of the required parameters for that circuit, for the power assistance needed to go round a flat out right-hander like both of those Arrabbiata corners were. And if you fall outside of the window of assistance that you've set up, essentially you no longer have that power assistance, and you're then, as a driver, having to fight that manually, which is almost impossible, as I say. So that's essentially what happened. It would have felt like the steering was just locked in place, but actually what it is, I mean, if you've ever tried to drive a car with any extreme geometry when the power steering has failed, or when the engine's turned off, you try and steer your car sitting on the drive with no power assistance, it's incredibly hard, isn't it? You can hardly move it. Well, in a Formula 1 car at speed, that's even greater than that. So the feeling as a driver is it's just locked solid. It's not locked solid, it's just almost impossible to turn manually. So that's essentially what happened. I hope that explains. There we go, right. Were you with McLaren when they had their controversial brake pedals, says Neil Cunningham. Good point. No, I wasn't. Well, no, I wasn't. Not when it happened. I came after that, but it was still a bit of a kind of legendary tech breakthrough in my time. The car was still there. The technology was obviously still there, but I wasn't there when they were racing it. That was before my time, unfortunately. But it was a brilliant trick. It was a brilliant example of finding ways around the rules, and actually the rules were rewritten to specifically ban that afterwards. So yeah, it's one of those brilliant little tricks. Here we go. Let me see. Right, let's take a question from the chat. Alan Stewart says, "Hi Mark, what's your opinion on the standing restarts? Are they a good idea, or should F1 revert to normal safety car restarts?" I think that there's nothing wrong with them, and I know what happened in Mugello, but we went through all of the reasons for Mugello last time around, certainly with the restart from behind the safety car. I know that Sebastian Vettel has complained that having a standing restart after a red flag like that is negatively impacting those that are not starting off the racing line. But the truth is, I mean, I saw Michael Massey, the race director, come out and say, well, I'm not quite sure what Sebastian's saying, because before both of those restarts, the circuit sweepers were out cleaning the circuit, just like they would before the normal race start. So actually it should have been no different in terms of the surface and the difference between the racing line and the non-racing line in terms of your starting grip levels. So I don't see a problem with it. I don't see that it's a bad thing. It could go either way, but I actually think that those race starts, the race start is often the most exciting part of any Grand Prix. So if we get a red flag and we're having a restart, why not do it again? You know, we have to consider the show in everything we do, as long as it's safe, as long as it's not spoiling competition. But after a red flag, that feels like a perfectly adequate way to restart a race. So I'm not against it. I don't think it's needed, but I think it's quite a decent addition, and I don't see why we should change it. I mean, let me know what you guys think. Standing starts are cool, says Varun Sambi. I do think they add some excitement to it. What are your thoughts on taking your mandatory pit stop under the red flag, says Jess. I think we sort of covered that last time. I think it's one of those things that we could change the rule, but actually if you want to start making sure that nobody is disadvantaged or advantaged in any of these situations, you'd be changing so many rules. It's like when a safety car comes out. If a safety car comes out and you haven't yet made your pit stop, you might get a massive advantage over the guy that's just made his pit stop before the safety car comes out. And you have to accept that there is a huge amount of luck that can play a part in any sporting event. Sometimes it falls for you, sometimes it falls against you. So I don't think it's a massive drama. On that particular occasion, it worked out, didn't it, for Lance Stroll. On another day, it might work out for somebody else, or it may not even be an issue. So I don't have a huge opinion on that one, I don't think. Standing restarts are a good idea. The driver can get it right if it didn't go well the first time, yes, or they can get it wrong, like Valtteri Bottas did, you know, second time around, and probably ended up costing him the race. Certainly cost him a shot at the race, didn't it? Let me see. Thoughts on Mercedes wanting to remove blue flags? I'm not a huge fan. I understand why blue flags are there. I understand why they were introduced. There's a safety aspect to all of that, but on the flip side, I'm not sure they're needed today. I think it makes it too easy, and especially if we're talking about next year having reverse grid qualifying races, which I'm almost sure is going to happen as an experiment at some rounds. Let's ditch the blue flags. You know, let's make people fight their way to the front. I know they will for those races, obviously, anyway, but I just think it's something that I'd love to see. We're in a period of Formula One where we seem free to experiment with certain things. So let's experiment, let's try it out without them and see how we go. That's my opinion. Let me see. Was Kimi better skillful in Mugello than most other drivers? I don't know. Kimi, I thought, yeah, he had a decent race, didn't he? But, you know, that's experience plays quite a big role when you're going to somewhere new like that, where you have to, you know, the new drivers are learning to adapt to this new type of circuit with these cars. They're learning to adapt to new situations, especially with the race starts, the race restarts. Kimi's vastly experienced, so perhaps on that particular day, his experience played into his hands in an unfamiliar environment to some of the others. Right, let me see. Okay, so that was James Vowles. James, was it James? You're all saying it's James's idea at Mercedes. Was that James Vowles, perhaps? I'm not sure. Didn't see that one. So perhaps it's not a Mercedes idea, but it's James Vowles' idea, perhaps. There we go. Anyway, let's move it on. Jeremy Smith says, if they do reverse grid, I'll stop watching. Really? You wouldn't be intrigued to watch a reverse grid qualifying race? Come on, is you serious? Jeremy, pop another message in the chat. Would you honestly switch it off if at Monza next year they say, right, as an experiment, we're going to try a reverse grid qualifying race to form the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix. So we're going to start a short race on a Saturday in reverse championship order and see what happens. You wouldn't be intrigued to, oh, it's James Allison. Thank you, guys. You wouldn't be intrigued, Jeremy, to see what happened? Don't tell me you'd switch off. Hit me up with another comment. Tell me if you would honestly switch off or if that's just you shouting. I think we would all watch that, if just to see what would happen. I don't know if it'd be better or not, but I'd love to see what would happen. Let me see. Surely Kimi would have tested at that track for Ferrari at Taftich. Yeah, I mean, Kimi's tested there. Kimi had his first ever test there. So he's one of the drivers that has definitely tested around that circuit, but so have some others. And actually, just having run on a circuit might give you a very small advantage in the first 5 laps of Friday, where you're not having to learn as much about it as some of the others. Beyond that, It comes down to much more of your experience as a racing driver rather than experience on that circuit. None of them have raced there in Formula One. Yes to reverse grid. Reverse grid races aren't worth a penny. Well, I think we're going to find out next year. I think they could add some excitement at some races. John T's Corner. Hi mate. He says, I'll say the same thing yet again. This is going to be a rant. I'll say the same thing yet again. No one can say reverse grid quali will be bad because literally, not one person has ever seen it. Just try it just once at least. Nice one, John T. I like it. The shouting in capitals is much appreciated. And I 100% agree with you. This is an experiment that they're trying. They're not saying we are going to go reverse grids from here on in. That's not what's happening. They're talking about doing an experiment at a select few races next year, literally to see what happens. So don't tell me that anybody is not going to watch. You will get the biggest viewing numbers on a Saturday probably ever. I'm almost certain if they do that. Has Jeremy been back on? Jeremy, tell me if you would watch or not. Come on, come back. Right, let me see. You can't take a reverse grid race seriously. Let's leave the reverse grid. As John T has just rightly said, how can we all have an opinion, a strong opinion on whether it will work or not until we've tried it? You've got to give Formula One credit for experimenting and trying this. And if it doesn't work, let's trust that they will bow down to fan pressure, to pressure from sponsors or TV companies. If it doesn't work, then we'll leave it. Right, let's move it on because we could talk all night about reverse grids and I'm sure we will on some nights when it happens. So let's move it on then. Let's go to another one from here because, oh yeah, I got another good question here. So let's go with this one from Sriniketh. I hope I've pronounced that right. Both Kimi and Seb were so concerned about the delay in putting the tyre blanket during the red flag period. What's the reason behind it? Once temperature is lost, is it not possible to use it again? So that's a good question. It was Kimi and Seb, wasn't it? Shouting on the radio. Another brilliant clip from Kimi screaming at his team. Jeremy. There we go, he's back. Of course I'd watch Marc. Yeah, I knew you would, Jeremy. Thanks for being honest. Yeah, Kimi screaming at his team. If you haven't seen it, check out the clip. I think is on the F1 YouTube channel. It's brilliant. Just screaming, tyre blankets, give me the tyre blankets, get the tyre blankets on now. And the reason he's doing that, and he's absolutely right, you know, Ferrari were way too slack and slow in getting the tyre warmers on because, in answer to your question there, it's very difficult to bring the tyre temperature back up. Those tyre blankets, tyre warmers, they do a great job, but they're on for hours and hours and hours building up to the race start to get a set of tyres up to that 80 degrees or 100 degrees at the front, 80 degrees at the rear. So it takes hours to build up to that temperature. So if you let them drop very quickly, as they will very quickly in a standing situation in the pit lane where there's no heat in the brakes coming through, the car's not dynamic, it's not going around the circuit, tyre temperature will drop. And given that we were going back into a standing restart, you know, you need tyre temperature up as much as possible before you then head out onto your green flag lap, because then you can do some work in the car to bring tyre temperature up, but you're not going to get it up to its optimum level if you're starting at a much reduced level below optimum, below normal. So that's why these experienced drivers were shouting at their team, and I was really surprised that Ferrari were so slow in doing that. I think, in fact, we saw a couple of drivers, you know, having issues with that. I think Lewis even maybe struggled to keep the tyre temperature in his tyres before heading back out onto the circuit. In fact, you saw him weaving so much and struggling to bring brake temperature up, which are all connected, of course, that he had that issue where he'd worked the brakes and tyres so hard on the way around to the grid formation that he had smoke billowing out of the front brakes, and he was very close to bursting into flames and causing some much more serious issues. So yes, the reason is the driver, Kimi and Seb, vastly experienced, knew how important it was to get the blankets on, keep the temperature in as early as possible in that phase. And yeah, unfortunately Ferrari seemingly not quite as on the ball with that one. Right, let me see. I heard that they're banning tyre blankets next year. Not next year. They were planning to ban tyre blankets. That's Alex Lamas. They were planning to ban tyre blankets ahead of the introduction of the 18-inch tyres. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we've now delayed that, haven't we? So I think we've got a year of the 18-inch tyres in 22 with blankets, and then we phase blankets out after that. I think I'm right in saying. There's so many updates over the last 6 months or so, I might have lost that, but I'm pretty sure I'm still right in saying that. So they were planning to do that next year, but that's when they were going to introduce the 18-inch tyres next year. That's been pushed back to 2022, and I think because there's so much new to understand and learn about those tyres and the cars in 22, they've actually agreed to keep the tyre blankets for that first year as well. So that's the answer to that one. Will Aston Martin have a really good chassis next year, given that they work with Red Bull now? No. So Caleb Jeva, no. So Caleb, the way that Aston Martin are working coming into the sport is they're essentially just Racing Point as they are today, rebranding as Aston Martin. There will be some periphery changes, and longer term they will start to make more and more changes, but next year Aston Martin will have essentially the Racing Point car from this year, just repainted, still with the same Mercedes engine, different driver, of course, we now know, Sebastian Vettel joining. But that is a decent chassis. So they will have a decent chassis. It's just that it won't be anything to do with their relationship with Red Bull. And that relationship with Red Bull comes to an end. So the sponsorship will end at the end of this year with the Red Bull racing team. And the only relationship that Red Bull will have with Aston is for the duration of the Valkyrie's full development. Once that comes to an end, once that program comes to an end, all ties will be cut, I believe. Who's Sebastian Vettel? You remember him? Right, I don't agree with reverse grid. Mickey Mouse, says John Valian Bailey. Well, you're all welcome to your opinions, of course, but there is only one way to find out. Right, let's move it on. What else have we got here? A couple of quick ones. Oh yeah, Kay says, how much are you looking forward to the Sakir GP around the perimeter of the Bahrain circuit? I can't wait. It's the closest F1 will get to a US-style oval. What do you think F1 would be like on a true oval? We won't talk about Indy 05. We won't talk about Indy 05. Am I looking forward to it? I am looking forward to it. I'm intrigued by Bahrain's outer circuit. You may have seen the laps that I think Jimmy Broadbent did some laps on the sim in an F1 car around the perimeter circuit. I mean, it's a blisteringly fast lap. I can't remember what lap time he did, but it's something like, I can't remember, it's 50-something seconds, 53 seconds or something ridiculous. So it is fast. So what I'm excited about is it's something different. And as I've said this before, I'm well up for that. I am one of these people that thinks we should definitely have a calendar within Formula One that presents a whole different range of challenges. So, you know, some might be like Monaco, extreme end of the range. Often a terrible race, but Saturday at Monaco is spectacular. It's one of the best qualifying sessions of the season because everything's on the line and it's so critically important. So the focus almost moves onto a Saturday, doesn't it, in Monaco? I don't mind that for a one-off race. When it comes to somewhere like Monza, we've got this incredibly high-speed circuit, or we go to places like Singapore, which is much lower speed, but risk versus reward when you've got walls next to the track. And each one of these circuits and events even should provide something a little bit different, because if they're all the same, it could be boring. So Bahrain's outer circuit will give us that. First of all, it'll be a brand new circuit that nobody has raced on before. And secondly, it's again something massively different. Hugely low downforce, very long straights, really high speed. It's going to play to a very different set of strengths to, well, even to just a week earlier at the regular Bahrain circuit. So I'm looking forward to that. How will teams adapt? How will they learn how to get the best out of their car in a really short space of time? So yeah, I'm excited by it, Kay. I'm not sure it's going to produce the best race because I think overtaking is going to be just DRS assisted and that's it. But having said that, I do think it's going to be a spectacular event because people will make mistakes. People will be learning on the fly, a little bit like they were at Mugello. 56 seconds. Thank you, Adam Elliott. That is a fast lap. The poor guys holding out the pit board have barely got time to change all the numbers, look up at the screen, refit the numbers and hang it back out again. Right, Ferrari's already sweating thinking of Bahrain. Yeah, it's not going to suit. That circuit is not going to suit teams who are slow in a straight line, Ferrari. Right, what else have we got here? Oh, here's a quick one. Rob says, does every mechanic in F1 have their own set of tools, or are they common tools for everyone? And you just have to put it back where it belongs. Thanks, love the show. Well, they are typically, a mechanic has their own tools across Formula One. There are some teams that have a tool deal, for example, and they kit everybody out with a set of tools that they require. But in my experience, and in most teams and most people within Formula One, they have their own set of tools. And you get those cabinets, those Lister cabinets that you see at the back of the garage, next to where the driver's sitting behind the car. Every mechanic has essentially one drawer in that cabinet with a tool tray that we used to spend days, if not weeks, designing, making look as beautiful as possible with your tools lined up in CNC milled foam, so they're all perfectly arranged and there when you need them. It's very Formula One. We take a lot of pride over our tool tray, and you pull that drawer out and all that's in there is your tray, and each mechanic has one, like I say, and then there's other drawers that have communal tools for the car that might be special tools or bigger things, hammers for when things get really bad. But yeah, typically everybody has their own tools. Each mechanic has their own tools which they look after, they replace, they buy themselves, and they still put them back where they belong. Jack Robertson. Jack Robertson says, what do you think about reverse grids in F1? I'm not sure whether you're having a laugh, Jack, or whether you've just popped in now and missed everything we've been chatting about earlier, but I'll take it that you're having a laugh, so you made me laugh, well done. Let me see. That's a total car guy question. Epic, yes, everyone needs personal tools. It's true. Your tools, I think for any mechanic, whether you work in a garage down the high street or in a Formula One team, they become like a prized possession. You take massive pride and ownership of those. You don't want other people borrowing them. We need more hammers in F1. Believe me, there are certain situations when hammers do come out, but it's not very often. Right, so what else have we got? Hang on. Oh yeah, okay, this is a good one. Phil Crawford. Has Formula One missed the boat with the ACO's H24, that's hydrogen for those who don't know, announcement? F1 is locked in with its current power units until 2025 as far as I know. You're absolutely right, Phil. We are locked in with this until 25. For those who missed it, the ACO have announced that at Le Mans, I think from 2023, there will be a category specifically for hydrogen-powered cars, which I think is brilliant. I love that. Because what that's doing is that's forcing manufacturers who are already starting to look into this technology. Some manufacturers are committing serious funding to this, serious resource to hydrogen already. It's just starting to take off, way behind, of course, full electric, which has been on everyone's radar for some time now. People are starting to realise there may be some more potential in hydrogen. I mean, I've talked on here about Formula One looking at hydrogen for post-2025. There's all sorts of discussion that Formula One have been having about what that power unit should look like. Should it be hydrogen combustion? And the ACO they've blown it wide open. They've opened it up to manufacturers and said there is going to be a category in just a couple of years' time where only hydrogen-powered cars will be able to operate. I think it's brilliant. Have Formula One missed the boat? They haven't missed the boat because, I mean, just look at Formula One, what Formula One has done with the hybrid power unit that we have now. They're an incredible class-leading technology now. They're getting, over 50% thermal efficiency out of their internal combustion engine. Well, those technologies came along well before Formula One, so they haven't missed the boat. Formula One will eventually plump on whatever it is they're going to go for, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's two-stroke, whether it's something completely different. And whatever it is they choose, they will develop that to the max like Formula One does. And even if they started a bit behind some others, I'm sure the development, the rate that it goes in Formula One will very quickly become class leading. But in some senses, they've missed the boat in that they've missed the opportunity to grab the headlines with it. like the ACO have done. So yeah, I think they've missed the boat in some way, but it's never too late for Formula One to take on a set of technologies like that and see where we go with it. So I'm excited for the future of Formula One. I think Formula One's governance and its regulations are just starting to move in the right direction, which I'm not sure we can say for quite a few years the future's looked bright like that. And I think it is right now. So I'm excited about what possibilities are coming, the fairer distribution of prize money, the budget cap. I'd love to see technical regulations relaxed much more now that we have a budget cap to control costs, because a lot of those tech restrictions that we have in the regulations today were put in there to stop people spending too much money. Well, if we can do that via a cost cap, let's open it up. Let's let them work on some exotic materials or some, futuristic technologies that may have been prevented to stop people spending too much money. But if you decide that's worth spending your budget on, well then why not? I'd love to see a future of Formula One that looks a bit more like that. Formula One is so historic, only petrol will do, and before it's illegal, bring back V10s. It's never going to happen, my friend. I know that we would all love to hear and see a screaming V10. Believe me, I'd be at the front of that queue, having worked with them in the past. But it ain't going to happen. Bring back the V12s, says Dan Hill. Yes, for the same reasons, I'd love to see it, but it also won't happen. Right, what else have we got? Who do you think won't be driving next season who hasn't yet signed a contract? Good question, Adam Elliott. Who won't be on the grid that's on the grid this year who hasn't signed a contract? Okay, my money is on Grosjean. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, so do shout them out. I don't think Grosjean will be there next year. Who else? I don't think Giovinazzi will be there next year. That will free up spots. So there's obviously Alonso coming in to take the one vacant spot that's been freed up with all this shuffling around. We've got probably Mick Schumacher. It sounds like more and more likely that he may come into the Alfa Romeo seat, with Kimi probably looking to stay on for another year. So that's probably my guess would be Grosjean to disappear. I think that's it, isn't it? Who else? Somebody else? Oh, Grosjean and Giovinazzi would be my two. But let's see what you say. Lewis Hamilton. Well, Lewis yet to sign a contract. What about a mention for Paul di Resta? If you mean in relation to Le Mans, massive congrats to Paul and the entire team. Paul's a friend of mine, so I've got huge appreciation for them winning Le Mans. It's a massive achievement, huge event in a racing driver's career. That's a really important one. So yes, well done to everybody. I actually didn't see Le Mans this year. I was just busy doing family stuff on a non-F1 weekend. So, but I do love the event. I worked on it a few years ago. It was brilliant. I loved it. So yeah, congrats to everybody who got to the finish of the Le Mans 24 Hours, because that is an achievement in itself. Kvyat out, Magnussen out. Yeah, Tsunoda, of course, that's right. Tsunoda could well come into the Red Bull squad via Kvyat's seat. That is a definite possibility. That's a good shout. Axel Foley. Magnussen out, possibly. We've got Perez, of course, looking for a seat, but I suspect that he's more likely to get Roman's seat rather than K-Mag's seat, personally. Yeah, Perez, somebody's saying Perez. Of course, who knows? Perez to IndyCar, says Can Cracker. That's a very good shout, and one that's already been talked about openly. McLaren, I think, have openly offered him a seat in one of their cars. So Perez may decide that he doesn't want to be potting around at the back of the F1 grid, and actually IndyCar could be a really good fit for him. So Perez could well be one of those drivers that's in F1 today that may not be on the grid next season. Absolutely. Let me see. Do you have an opinion on Gordon Murray's new car? Jack Selder. Not really, not only because I haven't looked at it in enough detail yet, but it's absolutely on my list that I want to look into. And Gordon Murray, I'm sure, will have done an amazing job with it. So I'm excited to see that car, but I haven't got an opinion yet. Perez and Hulk together again at Haas. Could happen. Could happen, Cam McMillan. Right, here we go. Bottas again. Bottas to Formula Ford. Right, leave him alone, boys and girls. Right, let's have another quick couple that I've got here, and then we'll move on to your stuff in the chat to finish it off. Chris A says, Mark, hypothetics. Hamilton's retired from F1. Who's the next F1 champion? Probably the guy that gets his seat. I mean, who's the next F1 champion? It does all depend who takes, certainly in the very short term. If we're talking about 2021, that Mercedes is still going to be very difficult to beat. So either we get a driver that can, well, it's between the two Mercedes drivers, isn't it, in this hypothetical conversation we're having. It's either going to be Bottas or the guy that takes Hamilton's seat. I'd love to see it be someone like Verstappen, but this is all very hypothetical, so let's move it on. And this also, slightly hypothetical, from T. Nevitt says, as the great race was held this past weekend, I was wondering which current F1 drivers he'd love to see compete at Le Mans in the future. For me, seeing Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin Valkyrie hypercar in the future is a mouth-watering prospect. It is. I don't really have I looked at this earlier and I thought, shall I include this question? I'm including it because I think it's an interesting talking point and I'd love to know your thoughts on this. First of all, I 100% agree. I think Sebastian Vettel in an Aston at Le Mans is probably something that's very much on the cards moving down the line. I think Sebastian would probably love to do it. He's now partnered up with an organisation that will have a car that could enter. So yes, we could see it. I'd love to see that. But I don't look at Le Mans. I think Le Mans is one of those race series where I don't look at it, or race events rather, where I don't look at it and I don't really look at the drivers. I don't think the drivers stand out at Le Mans. For me, what stands out is the car, it's the technology. I know the drivers play a huge part, absolutely. I'm not belittling what they do here, but that's an event that for me, as an engineering person, as a person who's fascinated by technology, is all about the car. For me, it's about getting that car through 24 hours of grueling racing. And I know the driver plays a huge part in doing that, but I don't necessarily have a huge opinion on who I'd like to see behind the wheel of one of those cars. I have a bigger opinion on what kind of car I'd like to see being successful at Le Mans. I'd love to see the Valkyrie. I would love to see some hydrogen-powered technology. So I'm really looking forward to all of that. But let me know, does anybody have an idea of a Formula One driver they'd like to see racing at Le Mans? Kimi and Seb in an Aston hypercar will be a dream team for Le Mans, says Rasmus Lindberg. It would actually, wouldn't it? I could see those boys doing that together at some stage. Lando in a Porsche. Yeah, Lando doing anything right now is going to put a smile on my face. I love him, he's brilliant. Let me see. A Bottas tyre changing at Le Mans. You're brutal, you lot. You're brutal. He's sitting second in the World Drivers' Championship, this guy. The Valkyrie's not going to Le Mans, unfortunately. Well, I know they have said that, haven't they? But, things can change. And a privateer could always take it, I guess, at some point. Mercedes Project One Le Mans version, if they make one. That would be cool. It would be cool, yeah. I'd like to see Hamilton, Vettel, Alonso team. That would be good, wouldn't it? Danny, Rick and Lando in the McLaren at Le Mans. I mean, this is the thing. Drivers, you're talking about personalities here, pitching them together. The driver input is not the star of the show at Le Mans, it's the car. So for me, I'd love to see some amazing cars, some great technology being pushed to the limit and getting right through to the end. Bottas T-Boy, Bottas to YouTube, Bottas to Mario Kart. Stop it. Right, that is all the questions that I've picked out. So let's see what you got. Stop beating up on poor Valtteri Bottas. Oh yeah, let's talk about this. Robert Chiu, $200 million must stop any new teams joining Formula One. Thoughts? Did you see this? So it's sort of slipped out in the news over the course of the Mugello weekend, I think, or just after. Formula One have agreed with all the teams that any new entrants into the sport have to pay $200 million as an entry fee, which will be shared out amongst all other teams if they want to enter the sport. The reason they've done it is because and this is a valid argument, the current 10 teams that have all agreed this Concord Agreement moving forward, securing their financial future going forward over the next, whatever it is, 5 or 6 years, that financial future they've secured is based on the share of the prize money of Formula One, which is divided amongst the 10 teams in this new, much more equitable way that they've all agreed upon. If we get an 11th team come in, all of that gets diluted. They get less money, essentially, for doing the same thing. They're still spending the same money, still putting in the same effort, they're getting less in return. So the 200 million bond that a new team puts up is to compensate all of the existing 10 teams for the potential loss in prize money. It's also there to Botas to Deliveroo. It's also there to show a commitment from the new team that's coming into the sport. So if you're serious about entering Formula One, then I'm trying to stop looking at the chat because it's going to make me laugh. If you're serious, let's get back to it, Elvis. Come on, let's be serious. If you're serious about committing to Formula One and you're serious about entering the sport, $200 million shows just how serious you are. That's their thinking. But in answer to your question, whoever asked it a moment ago, you're absolutely right. I think it pretty much stops anybody, certainly in the short term, coming into the sport with a new team. What it doesn't do, and actually what it makes much more attractive, is the idea of taking over an existing team. So if you are a manufacturer wanting to come into the sport, it makes the smaller teams, the teams like Williams, like McLaren, like any of the, like a Haas, it makes those teams much more valuable because the advantage, the advantage of buying an existing entry means you no longer have to put up that 200 million bond. So that's what's happened. That's why they've done it. But I agree with you. I do think it's going to put anybody off joining Formula One because it just simply doesn't make much financial sense. But we will see. I don't think Formula One are necessarily too keen at this stage to have more than 10 teams. They want 10 teams. They want it to remain 10 teams. They certainly don't want it to drop below 10 teams. But given all the other changes that are happening right now, they're not necessarily massively keen to bring in more either. Right. Right. Jimmy Broadbent to Bottas's car. Leave it out. Give it a rest, you lot. These people do not like Bottas, do they, Mark? Says Jeremy. Right. What else? Come on, give me a question to finish up. What have we got? 8 minutes or so. Which Bottas are we talking about? 1, 2.0, 3.0. He's got multiple personalities. Right. Let me see. I'm gonna have to put a setting that blocks Bottas from the chat because otherwise we won't get anything done. Will Max leave Red Bull? Says, will Max leave Red Bull? Well, I think he's locked in till the end of 23, I believe. After that, I'd say there's a very high chance that he will be looking to move on. If you think about Lewis Hamilton's next contract, highly likely to be a 3-year contract, which will take him through 2021, 2022, 2023. Well, that's when, I think that's when Max comes up for renewal, even though I'm sure he's got escape clauses based on performance well before that. That could be the opportunity that Max maybe finds himself into a Mercedes. But who knows by then? The Mercedes is not going to necessarily even be the quickest car by that point. Will they even be still called Mercedes? Who knows? There's a lot of water to flow under the bridge before we get to that point. Josh Smith, have F1 cars got stronger structurally? It seems to be taking a lot of direct hits to their wheels and being able to continue in the race. Years ago, they would just break the suspension. Well, yes is the answer. In some areas, they've definitely got stronger. Certainly in terms of the monocoque and safety, the crash testing now is massively more stringent than it used to be. So they are much more structurally sound in terms of keeping the driver safe. In terms of wheel banging, I'm not sure they are, I think there might be small changes here or there where maybe the angles of some of the suspension components mean that they can take a wheel-to-wheel hit a little bit more. But the teams don't design that into their suspension. they're not looking to be able to bang wheels. They're looking for the optimum performance level. And that means making it as light as possible and as aerodynamic as possible. And those are the factors that trump everything else. So it may well be that we've seen a bit of wheel banging. We might have been lucky in that, face-to-face banging of the wheels, you often do get away with it. But yeah, I see what you're saying, Josh. There seems to have been a few that we have gotten away with. It's great because it keeps the car in the race, but it won't be a factor that trumps overall performance in the design phase. Let me see. Netflix is filming Mercedes this weekend for Lewis Hamilton's record-breaking weekend. Does this mean that it will be a bad race for Lewis, says Anne-Marie? I hope not. I'd love to see him do it. It's an inevitable thing, isn't it? I'm sure it's going to happen. Botas to dinner lady. Stop it. Botas to have a head start. I would love to see Lewis do it. I think where he does it is almost immaterial, isn't it? I think it's going to be an incredible achievement when it happens. And I'm really pleased. I didn't know that, but if Netflix are there this weekend following Mercedes, then great. That will make a great part of the show, won't it? Stop saying Trump. Yeah, sorry about that. How much performance gain will McLaren gain from the Merc power unit in 2021? Let's finish up with this one. Well, it's an impossible question to answer that, really. But as I think I touched on here once before, the power unit, is definitely the class-leading power unit. So there's an advantage that comes from that. It's not just about outright performance, but it's about, reliability and how much you can push that power unit within the scope of reliability. Those are all class-leading things. It clearly has a huge amount of power, maybe the most power out of any engine anyway, but it also has longevity in it and it's reliable. It's just a great power unit. So they have that as a plus. But they're having to install it into a chassis that was designed to take a Renault power unit. And that can come with some reasonable compromises. So the idea that packaging your Mercedes power unit is going to be very different to packaging your Renault power unit. And the aerodynamic shapes around the car will have to, or won't have been designed off the back of the chassis, which isn't changing for next year, to accommodate that. So they could, and this is a big unknown at this point, but they could take a hit from the negative effects of the packaging and the installation, and it will be a trade-off between that and potential performance benefits from the Mercedes over the Renault. So the answer to your question is I don't know, and nobody knows yet until we get a car out on the circuit and we see what the trade-off is. They may get lucky, it may slot nicely in, and actually the negative aero impacts, performance impacts might not be too great, and the performance benefit might be really good. So there we go. I'll leave you lot talking about Valtteri Bottas, giving him a brutal punishment tonight, albeit hilarious. And I'm going to leave you there because it is beer o'clock. Thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed tonight. It was nice having a total free-for-all, wasn't it? I'm still laughing at the Bottas chat. It was nice having a total free reign and no absolute structure tonight. So thank you for that, for all the input. I've got a couple, at least, I know I keep saying this, and last week I had no videos come up because my computer broke and had to go in to be repaired. I only got it back today, in fact, so it was lucky that we were able to do this tonight. I'm back up and running. I've got 2 videos coming this week. One is a really cool video, I hope, on the new Fanatec sim racing gear, which, by the way, is just mind-blowing. So if you're into any of that, keep an eye out. And the other one is a really interesting, I think will be an interesting and quite funny video on how DRS works. So that involves my son Rex playing a brilliant role as a comedy actor. So you'll enjoy that. If you not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Everyone keeps telling me, tell everyone to subscribe and like and all that stuff. Please do all that. Like on your way out, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you over the rest of the week. And if nothing else, you'll see a preview to the Sochi Grand Prix ahead of next weekend. Have a good one, folks. Ta-da!